Welcome, unadulterated adultery confessions. He was inches away from me, his breath unsteady, his body tense with anticipation. I leaned in just enough for my lips to brush against his, my voice a whisper filled with promise. This is only the beginning. Hi, I am Rachel, and today I'm going to tell you all how I seduced my son's friend until he couldn't take it anymore and became completely devoted. He was basically mine. It all started as something innocent, or so I told myself. My husband, Arthur, had long since stopped seeing me the way he should, the way a man ought to see his wife. The passion had faded, the glances had grown indifferent, and the bed had gone cold. At 48, I was still a stunning woman. I knew it, others knew it, but the one person who should have cared the most didn't. Then Simon walked into my life. He was just supposed to be my son's friend, a visitor, a boy I'd offer snacks and make polite conversation with. But the moment I saw him, something shifted inside me. He was young, athletic, and handsome in a way that left an impression. His strong jawline, tousled hair, and confident stance made my pulse race in a way I hadn't felt in years. I brushed it off as a harmless thought, something any woman would notice. One evening, as I passed by my son Richard's room, I overheard them talking. I shouldn't have been listening, but when I heard my own name slip from my son's lips, curiosity held me captive. I don't know, man. Sometimes I hear my mom and dad arguing. She keeps saying he doesn't satisfy her. Richard's voice was casual, but those words struck me like a bolt of lightning. Simon chuckled. Isn't your mom a little too old to be worried about that? I felt the breath leave my lungs. My heart pounded, but not with anger. No, it was something darker, something more dangerous. I pressed my back against the wall, swallowing the heat rising in my throat. Too old? Was that what he thought? That night, I stood in front of my mirror longer than usual, running my fingers down my curves, appreciating the beauty that still radiated from my skin. I wasn't old, I was in my prime, and I was going to prove it. That was the moment I made up my mind. Simon would learn exactly what a woman like me was capable of. And this was only the beginning. The morning sun streamed through the curtains as I stretched lazily in bed. Today, I was going to start my game. Slowly, subtly, but deliberately. I slipped into a gown that clung to my curves in all the right places, the soft fabric accentuating my figure without making it obvious. I wanted to look effortlessly alluring, not overly eager. Stepping into the kitchen, I found Simon pouring himself a cup of coffee. His hair was still slightly messy from sleep, and his shirt clung to his toned frame. Perfect. I smiled to myself before calling out, Simon, can you help me for a second? He turned, surprised, then nodded. Sure. What do you need? I pointed toward the top shelf where the spice jars were kept. Could you get me the cinnamon? I can never reach that high. As he stepped closer, I made sure to stand just a little too near. When he stretched up, his muscles flexed under his shirt, and I watched him intently. He grabbed the jar and handed it to me, his fingers grazing mine briefly. Thanks, I said, holding his gaze for a second longer than necessary. He cleared his throat and looked away. Just as we finished in the kitchen, Arthur walked in, adjusting his tie. I'll be gone for a few days, he said, grabbing his briefcase. Business trip. I feigned disappointment. Oh, that's a shame. I guess it'll just be me and the boys. Arthur barely acknowledged my words as he pressed a quick kiss to my cheek. I'll call when I land. And just like that, he was gone. The real game was about to begin. That evening, we sat around the dining table discussing Simon and Richard's college life. The conversation was lighthearted, filled with stories of professors, assignments, and weekend plans. I swear Professor Clark must hate me, Simon said with a chuckle. Every paper I submit, he finds something to criticize. Richard laughed. Nah, man, he just expects perfection. That's how he is. Just then, Richard's phone buzzed. I need to take this, he said, standing and stepping out onto the patio. My opportunity. I let my fork slip from my fingers, It clattered onto the floor. "Oh, clumsy me," I murmured. I got up slowly, sliding my chair back just enough to give Simon a clear view as I bent down to retrieve it. My gown shifted with the movement, exposing just enough of my legs to be tempting but not vulgar. I could feel his eyes on me, his breathing just slightly uneven. When I straightened, I met his gaze and smiled knowingly. "Are you all right?" I asked softly, stepping closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm fine." "Are you sure?" My fingers brushed against his shoulder again, lingering just a moment too long before I pulled away. He exhaled sharply as Richard walked back in, completely unaware of what had just transpired. Very early the next morning, Richard left to run some errands, leaving me and Simon alone in the house. I decided it was time to push things further. I stood in the bathroom, draping my red laundry over the towel before calling out, "Simon, could you bring me a towel?" I forgot to grab one. There was a pause, then his hesitant voice. "Ah, sure." A moment later, I heard his footsteps approaching. As he reached the bathroom door, I grabbed the curtain and with a deliberate motion, pulled it open. Simon froze, his eyes locked onto me for a long moment, admiration and shock battling in his gaze before he quickly looked away. Here's your towel," he stammered, holding it out without turning back. I smiled as I took it. "Thank you, Simon," I said, my voice velvety smooth, laced with amusement. He muttered something unintelligible and rushed out, clearly flustered. After I finished dressing, I found him in the sitting room, staring at the television but clearly lost in thought. I approached him, sitting beside him on the couch, much closer than necessary. "Are you sure you're all right?" I asked, placing my hand on his knee. This time, his jaw tightened. Yeah. I leaned in slightly, my lips near his ear. "You don't seem okay, Simon." He exhaled sharply but didn't move away. I tilted my head, studying his face. "Why did you look away when I was in the bath?" I asked, my voice soft but teasing. "You don't think I'm pretty?" His head snapped toward me, eyes wide. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I smirked. "Really? That's not what you said a few days ago. I heard you." His expression crumbled. "Oh," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Rachel, I'm sorry I said that. I didn't mean it." "Of course you did." I murmured against his ear before gently licking the edge of it with my tongue. He took a sharp breath, his body tensing. I leaned back slightly, my eyes locking onto his. "You'll pay for thinking I don't deserve intimacy, for thinking I don't deserve to be treated right." I started to move away, but his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he said in a smooth, nervous voice. "Please stop doing this to me." I moved closer again, just inches away from his lips, teasing him with the possibility of a kiss. "You don't get to decide when this ends," I whispered, my breath warm against his skin. "I will keep tormenting you until I am satisfied. And if you're lucky, I might give you a little gift. But if you're not, then you'll be in bigger trouble." His breathing grew heavier, his lips parting as he leaned in, desperate, losing control. But just before his lips met mine, I pulled away, my smirk deepening. "No, pretty boy. You don't get to kiss me after calling me old." His frustration was evident, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I leaned in one last time, my lips barely brushing his. "Now, if any of these conversations reach my husband's or my son's ears, you'll be in serious trouble. Do you understand?" His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Yes, Rachel," he breathed, nodding. "Good boy," I smiled, running my fingers lightly along his jaw before standing up. "Now this is just the beginning." With that, I turned and walked back to my room, leaving him there, completely undone. The next morning, I made sure to set the stage just right. Richard had barely finished breakfast when I asked him to run an errand for me. "Darling, Could you go pick up some groceries? We're running low on a few essentials, I said sweetly. He didn't question it. He had always been a helpful son. Once Richard left, I changed into my most alluring swimsuit, a deep red bikini that hugged my curves perfectly. Throwing on a sheer cover-up, I walked outside to find Simon sitting by the pool, his shirt off, lost in thought. The sunlight glistened against his toned chest, and I smirked, knowing exactly what I was about to do to him. I walked toward him, letting my hips swing with each step. "Simon, you're not swimming?" I asked innocently, removing my cover-up and stretching my arms above my head, giving him a full view of my body. He swallowed hard. No, I was just relaxing." I stepped to the edge of the pool and dipped my foot in. The water feels perfect. You should join me." He hesitated, but I saw the way his eyes roamed over me before quickly looking away. "I'm fine here." I slid into the pool, the cool water contrasting deliciously with the heat of the moment. I swam closer to the edge where he sat. "Come on, don't be shy, I won't bite," I teased, my voice dripping with amusement. Simon ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with himself. I decided to push further. "You know, I've always wondered." I trailed off, running my fingers along my shoulder, then down my collarbone, watching his gaze follow my movement. "Why did you really look away when I was in the bath yesterday?" His breath hitched. I was trying to be respectful." I leaned on the pool's edge, close to his legs, looking up at him with a smirk. Respectful? Or afraid? He exhaled, looking frustrated. "Rachel, please, you're making this hard." I chuckled, my fingers tracing the edge of the pool lazily. "Oh, I know, darling. That's the point." Without warning, I lifted myself slightly out of the water, droplets trailing down my chest. "Help me out," I asked, offering my hand. He hesitated but instinctively reached for me. As he pulled me up, I purposely let my body press against his for a split second longer than necessary. He froze. I leaned in, whispering near his ear, "You don't get to decide when this ends, Simon." "I do." He clenched his jaw, his breathing uneven, but I could see it. He was completely at my mercy. I smiled, brushing past him as if nothing had happened, leaving him alone, tormented and craving more. I had planned this moment carefully. Richard had been sent on an errand, leaving Simon and me alone in the house. I found him in the study, flipping through one of Arthur's books, pretending to be absorbed in its pages. But I knew better. His fingers drummed against the leather cover, his body tense. He was trying too hard to look unaffected. I leaned against the doorway, letting my robe slip slightly off one shoulder. "Studying hard?" I teased, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. He looked up, his eyes flickering over me before quickly darting away. "Just passing time," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I sauntered over, deliberately brushing my fingers along the edge of the desk as I walked past him. "It must be hard," I mused, lowering my voice to a whisper, "being here alone with me." Simon stiffened, his grip tightening around the book. "Rachel." I perched on the edge of the desk, crossing my legs slowly, my silky robe sliding further up my thigh. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "What's wrong, Simon? You seem tense." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "You're making this really difficult." I leaned forward, placing a finger under his chin and forcing him to meet my gaze. "Am I?" My lips curled into a knowing smile. "I thought you said I was too old to have needs." His breath hitched. "Rachel, I didn't mean that. I was just talking nonsense." I laughed softly, dragging my nails lightly down his arm. "Oh, I know, but that doesn't mean I'll let you off so easily." He inhaled sharply as I leaned in closer, my lips mere inches from his ear. "Tell me, Simon, do I still seem old to you?" I whispered, my breath hot against his skin. I let my fingers trail down his chest, feeling the way his heart pounded beneath his shirt. "No." he admitted in a strangled voice. You're breathtaking. I smirked, dragging my fingers lower. Good boy, I purred. Now let's see how long you can resist me. He let out a shaky breath, torn between his growing desire and the battle within himself. But I wasn't done tormenting him. Not yet. I reached for his tie, toying with the fabric before slowly, deliberately pulling it loose. Still want to play innocent, or are you finally ready to admit how much you want me? He clenched his jaw, his restraint crumbling before my eyes. His hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I leaned in, our lips barely brushing, teasing him with the promise of what he craved but couldn't have. At least not yet. This is just the beginning, Simon. I whispered against his lips before pulling away, leaving him breathless and wanting. And just like that, I walked out, knowing he was completely under my spell. A few days passed, and we kept exchanging glances and subtle touches whenever Richard wasn't looking. He had no idea what was going on. The thrill of secrecy made it all the more exciting. I was having fun, knowing that I was still desirable, that even though my husband ignored me, here I was, making a young man tremble, making him beg for mercy with nothing but my presence. The power was intoxicating. It made me feel alive and in control, and I wasn't willing nor ready to lose that control or stop playing this deliciously wicked game. The best part was watching the torment in his eyes and the way his body betrayed him despite his efforts to resist. He wanted me, and I knew it, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. No, I wanted him to suffer for it. I wanted him to crave me to the point of madness. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I decided to take things a step further. I had just finished my bath, the scent of jasmine still lingering on my skin. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Richard had stepped out to get something, leaving me and Simon alone once again. I smiled to myself. Perfect. Simon, I called out softly. He appeared almost instantly, his movements slightly hesitant but obedient. His eyes betrayed him. Nervous, eager, hungry. I took a slow, measured step toward him, watching his reaction. He was completely at my mercy, and the knowledge sent a thrill through me. I could have him do anything I wanted. I felt powerful. I felt beautiful. And I was about to have some fun. Which one of these? I gestured toward the bed where 3 delicate pieces of lingerie were laid out. Red, white, and blue. Do you think would look best on me? His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his gaze flickering between the silk and lace spread before him. His hands clenched at his sides as though afraid to move. Anyone would look magnificent on you, he finally managed, his voice hoarse. I stepped closer, just inches away, my breath teasing the side of his face. Anyone? I whispered, my lips nearly grazing his ear. His breath hitched. Yes, Rachel. I smirked. Let's play a game, I murmured, dragging a single finger down his arm. He tensed. You have 2 choices, I continued. You either give me a gentle massage. I leaned in even closer, my lips brushing just slightly against his as I finished my sentence. Or you get to see me in one of these. His entire body shivered in nervous anticipation. Which one are you picking? I purred, my lips just barely grazing his. He exhaled sharply, eyes dark with something he was desperately trying to control. I think I'll choose.